Why are my ears short and my pod's empty? It might not be a personal problem, but it could be your crop problem. We're going to discuss that on this episode of Blueprint to Yield. Hey everyone, Mike Evans here with Calibrated Agronomy, sitting next to Kelly Garrett and our man Clint Frese from Calibrated Agronomy. We're talking about why are my ears short and my pods are empty. It seems like kind of an odd topic, but I think we go through it every year, don't we? I mean, right, Clint? I mean, you get through the season and you're getting that reproductive time and you go walk a field and you think you've done everything right, and then you see aborted pods on beans or tip back on corn. What take us through your thought process when you start seeing that stuff?
You know, on corn, I usually see problems earlier in the growing season where we planted too wet. We got sidewall compaction. When we needed critical nutrient uptake, we wasn't getting it when the plant was trying to decide that. So I usually view that as an early season problem. Something happened early that is causing some of these stunted ears. You know, sometimes we'll actually, the only caveat to that is we'll throw a big ear. But then if we have crazy dry weather or stress, we'll tip way back from nutrient issues late. So be twofold on corn. Beans, we've gotten really good at stimulating beans. We can take plants and stack 150 pods, 200 pods on them, no problem. The problem I see over and over is, you know, at R5, R5.5, we bored them back to 60 pods a plant. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of times they're still pretty good beans, but the potential at one time was so great. And I really view the bean problem is our varieties have gotten so good at having the potential to have great yield, but we don't have the dollars or know-how to feed them correctly to retain them.
Yeah, that's right. And Kelly, like from a farmer's perspective, when we see that, I mean, what's the first thought goes through your mind when you see those kind of conditions?
Well, I would reiterate what Clint said about corn. It's a twofold problem. But then if we do set the stage, I find it more interesting to talk about the second problem. If we do set the stage and we do throw the big ear, why can't we hold it? And a lot of times, I think it's because of our traditional way of fertility, especially in the Midwest and the I states, we front load everything. And we don't have enough available to continue to go through the root system. Is the root senescing? Is the soil out of balance? Are we getting to the end of the season? And I really feel like what we're doing now with running that plane more than one time and the fertility, you know, the sap analysis to balance that plant and that R stage fertility is so much more important than that fertility up front. And that's something that's been a really eye-opening thing for me. You know, you and I have had big yield gains, 10, 15 bushel yield gains in corn with just potassium at R5. That's why the ear is short. You know, the lack of available potassium, things like that. And I find it very interesting that kind of that new approach we're taking to that very late season fertility. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you talk about sap analysis, and another one we were talking with Scott Wall about, and I thought this would be a great conversation because I think it kind of leads to this is, you know, he talked about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Clint, that you've put on too much nitrogen. We put a decline on carbon. Is that correct? What he was talking about?
Yeah.
And do you think that leads to some of this too?
I do, because, you know, in the soil, it's very much understood that high rates of nitrogen year over year is more detrimental to soil organic carbon than intensive tillage. And, you know, it's kind of a hard thing to grasp, right? You put too much nitrogen on, my carbon goes away. It's the same for the plant. The plant has the ability to actually turn on itself and use itself as a carbon source. So sometimes when we see this senescence, and we feel like we've got plenty of nitrogen out there, well, we may have too much nitrogen that's actually causing the plant to turn on itself and cannibalize itself for the carbon.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a very interesting thing that as we go down this advanced agronomy path, that, you know, the nuances that we learn. And to your point, Kelly, like the sap analysis has helped us kind of identify those issues, you know, and I think the big thing too is we talked about nitrogen, carbon, but being able to see the micronutrients and the roles they do as well, and the importance they have in that late season process to keeping the plant healthy.
Well, if we're missing one piece, if we're missing calcium, if we're missing boron, zinc, anything, if we're missing one piece, all of the other pieces are going to be shortchanged. And the SAP analysis and the ability to show that and to show you have this one missing piece. You know, like what it's uncommon that's just one missing piece, yep. Right? But it could be just one missing piece to really set the you've already set the stage, that one missing piece to put you over the top.
Yeah. So kind of switch gears here that, we see in the field, we're too late. Would you guys not agree? I mean, if we see pods aborting, we're too late, right?
Too late. Yeah, they're not coming back.
No, they're not coming back. We can't remake them, right? So, like how we do it with your farm and stuff, and I'm sure you do it, Clint, is like, okay, the easy thing is to put the white flag up and just say, we'll just try again next year. But I think the things we've done too here is like we keep trying to analyze the plant as we go on and try to prepare for next season. Right? I mean, Clint, is that what you guys do over there?
When we're making these micronutrient applications later, we're applying calcium, potassium, things that's going to drive sugar movement. The beautiful thing about SAP is we have that biological parameter of EC, our nutrient flow, of our total sugars, our bricks. So if we're not using products and nutrition correctly, at the end of the day, what we're after is being able to move energy around the plant and move energy to reproductive tissue. So, that beautiful thing with SAP is we can actually go out and use mineral nutrition to do a very much a biological process or a plant physiological process. So I'm very much, as we move forward, paying attention to those parameters because I want all that energy going to my pods and kernels.
Yeah. So next thing that goes along when people see this, most people probably, I'd say 80%, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is like weather. It turns hot and dry, and not the weather caused that. But I think as we've learned, there's, the weather's going to initiate that. And there's some things that we can't spend enough money to counteract the weather.
We can't overcome it.
Yeah. But there's things we can do to mitigate, use that famous word of mitigation or stem the tide, I like to say, to make it less severe. So in your guys' mind, Kelly, take it from a farmer's perspective. I mean, that's the default, right? Weather.
Yes. If it gets hot and dry, you're going to hear people say, well, we're short of potassium because it's not moving in the plant without moisture, which is true. But we can still mitigate some of that problem with a foliar application. And we can identify how much we need or what we need with the SAP analysis, and then we can go make that later. So, I would say in a wet year where you have a lot of great potential, that potassium late season is really going to help put it over the top. In a dry year, that potassium late season might not put it over the top, but it's really going to make a huge difference, relatively speaking, because there isn't much available on the ground because it's got to have moisture to move. And so never give it, we don't want to throw good money after bad, but we don't necessarily want to give up just because of the weather.
Yeah. I mean, Clint, like to his point, and there's tools we can implement in those drier years when it turns dry, or say it's not even a drought, just 2-3 week period in the grain field that turns hot and dry and kind of, I mean, there's tools in our buckets to help maximize what we have, or is it more of a fact of front loading or getting the plant that season to handle, at that point in the season, to handle that stress event?
If we have the budget and the means, we want to use minerals to build stress tolerance, to weather through and have a robust plant that has extra nutrition stored in it to be able to handle the stress. The industry as a whole, and I'm guilty myself, I get into stress. It's like, well, I'm going to go apply PGRs. I'm going to apply stress mitigation products. Since we started doing the SAP, we really learned that you do that, that's great. Sometimes they can be very effective, but there's a nutritional demand associated with putting your plant into a defense mechanism. So to me, the art is using the minerals first, building a stress tolerant plant that is balanced, and mode 2, when stress really hits hard, it is mineral nutrition, trying to balance the plant, plus maybe a little bit of a stimulatory thing to help get through until we can get a rain, but the beautiful part of having these budget dollars for in season is that we can eventually make the call. Okay, it's 100 degrees and it hasn't rained for 40 days. We are going to pull this last pass out. To me, that is the beauty of this whole system of being to save that dollars for the next year. So,
yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, we're going to switch to your favorite crop. I know it's your favorite, soybeans. Planted a whole 100 acres this year of it, so we're trucking right along. But there's still 90 million acres of beans planted this year, or maybe it's less than that. You probably know that better than I do. But there's a lot of guys. Beans are tight. There ain't a lot of budget in there. You know, we get in a scenario with beans, and I think I always call them the forgotten crop or the rotational crop. Everybody treats them kind of like as is. You know, for guys growing beans, they're going to go into this, you know, and looking at aborted pods. And, you know, I've heard it. Yeah, I heard it last year from some guys we work with, you know, looked great. Then all of a sudden I walked out there and I had a bunch of aborted pods. And it wasn't really stressy, but something triggered in the plant. Does it go back to mineral nutrition on beans, Clint? Or is it a variety thing? I mean, how do you guys manage beans out that way in those scenarios? Or what do you look at, I guess?
Well, one thing when I grew up, we fertilized in front of corn for dry and nitrogen, and beans never got fertilized in front of. So the first thing to be successful, we've been planting earlier. We're actually fertilizing for our crop, and, you know, looking at the nutrient uptake curves, beans, the demand is so much late season. You know, I think moving forward, a lot of guys need to look into, instead of maybe using AMS in front of beans to drive it, maybe that can be spinner spread in season. Maybe we use elemental sulfur, so it's coming available during the R stages when we truly need that big demand. So there's a lot we can do with nutrition first. But from there, we're trying to, there's a lot of necessary stresses in soybeans. And the one thing we're throwing at beans is tons and tons of chemical, you know, usually 2-pass residual, a lot of times in some cases now 2-pass post. So I think, being able to deploy, products, nutrition in that herbicide window has been a big game changer for us as far as having a better stage set where that plant isn't set back for 10 days. Because at the end of the day, beans are a C3 plant. It is all about how much energy they can get. So when we stall a bean out for 10 days, it's not good. You know, yield's lost right there. So
yeah, because it can't store photosynthetic energy like corn can to reuse it if it needs to as a backup plant. If it can't, it can't do it. So that's a good point. So I mean, we talked about moving on to like, how do we fix it for next year? And I think you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of it goes back to the soil condition, right? I mean, Kelly, you talk about a lot about soil balancing and how that's important. I think I think that plays a role into that too, the condition of your soil as we get into the later seasons. We've seen it on your farm. I'm sure you've seen it, Clint, is like, and I think you hit on it earlier, is like that root senescence and it dies off, and then that shuts the plant down, and it redirects energy to where it goes into survival mode.
The root system on the soybean is not great anyway.
Well, that's a taproot.
Yeah, especially relative to corn.
So I think from your perspective, would you agree that the more imbalance you talk about a lot, the farms, we talk about it here, I guess is what I'm getting at. The farms that we've done a better job of getting balance are typically, no matter what event happens, are your better farms.
Yes. And soybeans, in my opinion, are a much more fickle crop. If there's a problem in that soil, the soil's out of balance from a base saturation perspective, and it shows up a little bit in corn, it's going to show up a lot in soybeans. And it very much needs to be taken care of in that way. All of those things, all of those boxes need to be checked for soybeans.
Yep. Yeah.
And I would say, on corn, a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this myself, farmer, we want to check boxes. I got to get this crop in. I'm going to go on to the next thing. To eliminate some of this bottlenecking the ears, having some patience in the spring to me is the first line of defense of, hey, I'm going to make sure I have to start this corn plant off the best it can be. So when I am in that period of V3 to V5, I'm setting maximum number of kernels around and maximum length. So that would be my advice on the first side. And then, as what we talk about all the time, that in-season nutrition piece is big on the backside.
So on that point, Kelly, we talk every day about that, but from like a dollar sense from you as a farmer, I mean, how much? I probably got the number somewhere, but you remember them better than I do most days. So from your budget as a farm total, like say 5 years ago, what you ran for fertility to now, how much do you think you've switched the percentages to micronutrients, carbons, and those what are considered nuanced nutrients?
Like the plant food that we've always run would stay the same, and it's probably Excluding fungicide, I would say it's probably a 35% switch, because that's about how much we've turned down the nitrogen and we've reallocated that to the micronutrients. So a very simple off the top answer would be 35% if you want to include the fungicide spend, because in my opinion, the goal is to achieve 95% assimilation. And if we do that, we won't use fungicide. So then it becomes greater than 35%. Then you're talking more towards 40. If you're talking about a whole gross dollars thing, is how much we've changed it, which is an amazing thing to me. I think about that a lot, about the dollars that we used to spend, and now we've pushed them later.
Yeah, because I think that's always the question, at least, and Clint, you can talk about this too with the people we consult with, is you start talking about this process and trying to figure out how much do I allocate to micronutrients? Where do I start? And sometimes we get hung up with just like reading the SAPs is like, this is what we need to do. And from a budget thing, we need to figure out, and I'm sure growers out there listening to this are like, well, where do I start? Well, how much should I allocate to that?
I don't think that you should ask how much you should allocate. I think that you should, again, like we're getting towards the 1st of July. You should start taking SAPs this year and see where you're at and see what's a perfect world and what would that cost. Can you meet the perfect world? Can you allocate that? I don't think the first question should be, what should I allocate? The perfect world should be, what do I need? And then can I afford that? And how can I make that fit in there? I think you have to go about it from that perspective, because otherwise, you're kind of playing, in my opinion, what I would call the finite game, where I'm trying to fit this all into this $35 bucket, or I'm trying to fit this in this $27 bucket. Don't do that. Try to see what the bucket is, and then see if you can handle it that way. So start taking SAPs now in July and see where you're short and see what your crop needs, and go about it that way. And then, can I reallocate all of it? But I really believe, though, when you turn down the nitrogen and when you look at the fungicide that I hope that you don't need, I really think you're going to be happy in the end. I believe that we're putting our crop in less. For example, we had the challenge plot at Matt Miles. Matt raised 240 bushel corn. We raised 240 bushel corn. They said that we couldn't take our system to Arkansas and raise corn because we didn't have the Iowa soil. So we took our system, went down to Arkansas, and Matt and us both raised 240 bushel corn, but we did it $50 cheaper.
Yeah.
And I believe that happens time and time again when you're using the SAP analysis and reallocating that budget in that fashion.
The caveat, and the one point I want to make light of is, if you would have done that, are you in that same plot this year?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to watch that. They've been underwater, right, tons and tons of water. If it's flat soil, that may change. And, when I look at my farm and the farmers I get to work with close year over year, we're probably spending half as much on dry fertilizer as my neighbors, our current removal rates. Probably in, our fall NH3 is probably 35 to 40% less than average for our area. But year over year, there's years where I spend less than those guys all in. When things are really good, there's years I maybe spend a little more, and there's years right around the same. So, we're kind of nimble to out in the field watching the SAPs. I mean, if we got the potential, we're going to hit it and give it what the crop needs. Oh.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think kind of get a little philosophical here, but really what we're talking about when we're talking about, tip back on corn or port is like, we got an issue. And I think sometimes, as humans, just in general, we see a problem, we either take it head on or we just buzz by it and forget about it ever happened, right? But I think the tools we got with SAP analysis now and all the stuff we got, we can tackle these problems and figure out why they happened. Would you guys agree with that kind of philosophy?
I would tell you that, like we're talking about tip back on corn, the way that we farm now, the last 2 years, 75% of our plants have set 2 ears.
Yep.
But not only does the ear tip back, we lose the second one on a lot of it. I find that personally offended. I want to know why don't we hold it? And I don't think it's a mistake that one person is making, but I think it's why can't we figure that out? You know what I mean? And I think that we're coming. A few years ago, we didn't have second ears on that many plants,
yep.
Right? And now we're setting those second ears. So we've made the step in the right direction. the plant has so much more potential. And we talked about this a couple of days ago when you first got here. There's a lot of talk about selecting the right hybrid and stuff. And I know that that's important, but there is so much to be gained from mineral balance and achieving that I'm like, I don't really care what the hybrid is, because I don't think we're getting anywhere near the top end of it anyway. And so you want to talk about a philosophical thing? That's my philosophical thing right there. Everybody worries about the hybrid and everybody worries about this or that. Should worry more about mineral balance, because there's so much potential out there. We're not even close to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't agree more. And, one thing I think we kind of skimmed over a little bit was, the right plant population. The stuff we're talking about is once you get the population dialed in, then everything we're talking about, is a big deal. So,
I'm interested to know what you do. I have been since 2015. I want to raise a half a pound of grain per plant.
Yeah.
And so I went from planting 34, 35, 36,000, and now it's a variable rate based on the yield map. And we're going to plant 28 to 29 and a half, somewhere in there, final stand right in there. And then I almost wonder, like, should we be turning it down to 25 and we'll be putting 2 ears on because there's less competition? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that, but those are the things that I think about and wonder. I mean, what's your variable rate?
So my variable rate now, of course, we went all the way in the early days up to the upper 30s, low 40s.
We did as well.
But today, we're dropping 26 to 34.5 as our max on our really good dirt. Soybeans were the opposite. The poorer the soil, we struggle with canopy and heat. So I'm higher population on my tougher acre and lower on my better acres. So, but the thing that got me thinking was one year where we wouldn't quit raining. We ended up with a final stand count of between 22 and 25,000. Got too late to replant it. Fairly even. The field went 240. And it's like, well,
why do we need it all? I agree. Why do we need all that vegetation?
And our disease pressure on it. We got more space.
Yes,
we got more air movement.
I agree.
There's a lot of things that get 100%. Easier.
I think the same thing. We kept going on that half a pound of grain, and then I thought, like, 20,000 plants is 10,000 pounds. That's still 178 bushel. On some of these really tough base saturation areas, that's all it's going to raise. So one year I got Evans to turn it down to 20,000. Well, then my dad was wondering, where are all the plants? Yeah. And then the weed control, but you talk about a porn star here. Holy cow. Yes. Wow, it was awesome. Yes, I'm like, that's all we need there. That's all we need. But when the weed control becomes an issue, then, but God, it's frustrating to me that I got to put more vegetation out there just for the weed control. I don't like that.
Well, and your nutrient requirements become different too.
Yes.
Everything changes really dialing in and doing some population strips year in and year out is really a great practice to have on your farm.
Cook dissected a plant the one day when we were together, and there's 5 ears in there. Well, why do I have to have all those plants? Let's just get all 5 ears. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. No, and it's great. We walk fields, and I think this is part of walking fields. Just the population thing's always been intriguing to me. And I'm with you. We walk a lot of fields, and where we pull back in areas that need to be pulled back, you get a lot better plant. And I think just from the nutritional demand to come out of the soil, I think that's a lot of it. The guys get told to put on 34, 36,000, some of the good Iowa dirt, right? Good Iowa dirt. This is pretty good right here, ain't it? But it,
it could be flatter.
Yeah, it could be. But to put more plants out there. But my always thing with guys was like, can your soil handle those plants?
100%.
Can your soil, and back then when I told them that, I was from a fertility mind. But now as we talk as calibrated agronomy, obviously biology plays a role into helping feed that plant just as much as the soil nutrition. So I think when guys are thinking that and seeing some of these issues in corn, that's another area they can go to is the plant population. That's a great point, Clint.
Absolutely. And, I think high plant populations have sold a lot of fungicide. It's made it to where we don't even question fungicide as an ROI anymore. We've forgot, we don't even leave strips. It's just we're putting fungicide on.
Insurance policy.
It's an insurance policy.
Or this fixed ear. You got to put more plants out there because it's a fixed ear. Yeah. Everything flexes.
Yes.
They all flex. The thickness of your thumbnail is 50 bushel on a kernel of corn. Yeah. I mean, this idea that it's a fixed ear so we can put 40-some thousand out there. In 2020, I tried that. We planted 50,000.
How'd that work?
We had a derecho.
Flat.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Boy,
pretty.
it was tall.
Yes. Competition for light.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? I mean, great conversation. We've been talking about corn and soybeans. And I think the other side of it too is, what do you call them in Illinois? The guys that head for the lakes.
Oh, CBO, corn bean Ozarks. We gotta go, yeah.
Corn bean Ozarks. It's a great rotation.
And for my grandfather's generations, it was a CBF, corn beans Florida. And now it's transitioned to the CBO.
But I think that's the value of, it's not an easy industry. You get, get in August, but getting your boots out in the field or having somebody do it.
Yeah.
Kelly has me do it.
I don't do it. Evan does.
But being boots in the field, I think this is another part of this topic, is being boots in the field and actually listening to what your crop.
Yeah.
We talked in a podcast with Scott Wall, and the SAP report tells you what your crop needs, right?
Yep.
That's what it's basically telling you. And this is visual conversation of other things, being observant, and really observational agronomy as well is just as important to what we're doing versus any of the data we collect, right?
And you put the observation agronomy coupled with SAP, and you're going to find your problems very, very quickly.
Good stuff. He's Clint Frese. It's my man Kelly Garrett in his cowboy hat. I'm Mike Evans. And you got any questions? Feel free to get a hold of us at Calibrated Agronomy, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Blueprint to Yield.